Welcome to the More Perfect Union, the podcast that offers real debate without the hate. I'm Kevin Kelton, a radical moderate who ping-pongs between wings of his own party like a Chrissy Everett, Martina Navratilova baseline volley played on slow clay from somewhere in Central Texas. And once again, I'm always pleased to share the mic with DJ McGuire.
That's right. Probably the only person who does or listens to this podcast who knows that reference, because I was a tennis geek as a kid from Hampton Roads, Virginia.
Rebekah Kuschmider.
Also a tennis geek. I know exactly who Chrissy Everett and Martina Navratilova are, but let's face it, Serena Williams, greatest athlete of all time. Greatest. I will not be taking any questions. Kensington, Maryland.
And the second greatest athlete of all time, Greg Matusak.
Thank you. Thank you. I actually have no idea who those people are. I assume it has something to do with sports ball of something. So awesome. And there's nothing I actually, unlike many Republicans, do enjoy watching women's sports. So yeah, power to them.
Well, speaking of nothing, actually, but I'm going to segue to the show.
Speaking of terrible segues.
2024 is off to a great start. This is going to be terrific. I'm so
Welcome
psyched.
to 2024, or as we are calling it, Political Thunderdome. A lot happening in just the first few days of 2024. We have to start with the news story that's breaking today. Congressional leaders seem to have agreed on a 2024 spending bill or spending budget or spending levels. DJ, without getting into the weeds of what's in it, because frankly, I don't think anybody knows what's in it, what does this mean? And then my follow-up question is, whatever happened to the funding for Israel and Ukraine?
Okay, well, don't worry about getting into the weeds, because there are no weeds. They have agreed to a top-line number for all non-defense spending and a top-line number for all defense spending in 2024. What makes up those numbers? Nobody has agreed to, and nobody knows. So there are plenty of opportunities for this to go on the rails and crash into a ravine.
So this gets us to end of fiscal 2024. This is end of September. Are they talking this deal?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And does it have any relationship to the individual appropriations bills that the Senate passed months ago? Or is that still unclear?
Well, that's the thing. Like I said, nobody knows what makes up these numbers. So when it comes to the individual appropriations bills, I'm sure there'll be plenty of arguments about whether this goes here or there, whether this goes to this agency or that agency, and all sorts of craziness. So that's why I'm not entirely 100% optimistic that this is actually going to go through.
Okay, so moving on to the presidential election that is starting to heat up as we get just a few days away from the Iowa caucus. It seems that both candidates have attacked the other one as being an existential threat to democracy. So no matter who we elect, the good news is we will have an existential threat to democracy. What do you guys see as the greatest danger we face as a nation going into this election?
Where to begin?
Long list, Kevin. Let's begin with the fact that Joe Biden has a long and storied history of accepting the results of elections that he didn't win, and Donald Trump doesn't. So there's only one person who's ever tried to stage a coup in response to an election, and it's not Joseph Robinette Biden. Trump's entire agenda is about getting revenge, about gutting the civil service, and about hacking the cabinet and the appointee levels of federal agencies with loyalists. And everything is about loyalty tests. That's not democratic. That is dictatorial. And I believe that he poses the greater existential threat to American democracy. I see Greg disagrees with me.
I know Greg disagrees.
No. I actually don't know if I really know what existential means.
A threat to the existence thereof.
Oh, okay. In that case, I do know what it means. I went to a state school. I'm fine. So Rebekah, as usual, is right. And I'm not going to disagree too much, but I'm going to take a different path. So for me, and this is, you're going to have to work with me here. I think it's teachers, education, and the lack of teacher pay. I see the biggest issue to democracy is that we are not paying teachers enough to stick around. If you take a look at high school classes, if you look at the smartest and the brightest and the best 15, 20 years ago, like a lot of those kids would be like, I'm going to be a teacher. And it's hard for me to even say, boy, what would be a great job for you now is being a teacher. It's really difficult to say like, wow, low pay, no respect from anybody. And you're
Moms for Liberty picketing your workplace.
Right.
I was on Twitter recently and I posted something about my son who's taking AP government, and he was doing a unit on presidential powers. And I was like, hey, so by tomorrow he'll know more about presidential powers than most of the MAGA base. And someone responded like, just have him read the Constitution. He's probably being brainwashed by drivel in the public schools. I'm like, okay. Yeah.
Once again, one candidate believes magnets don't work underwater.
And that's the same candidate who stared directly at the sun.
Right.
In the meantime, as much as Trump himself is a danger, and he is, the greater danger remains his voters. We have tens of millions of our fellow Americans, and yes, I'm using inverted commas for that, who are genuinely happier under Kremlin domination so long as they get to hate gay people and black people. And that is our greatest danger, no matter who their front person is. In this case, it happens to be Donald Trump. But they are the problem, because if Joe Biden defeats Donald Trump, as I think he will, and as I hope he will, those voters are still around. They're still spouting election-denying nonsense. They're still repeating Russian talking points and being proud of it. They're still saying, I think Russia's the good guys, which I have actually heard from someone this week.
And I am going to go with that old chestnut, violence. I still think that the greatest danger to our democracy going forward, at least in 2024 and 25, is, well, let me put it this way. Every time there's a presidential election, every 4 years, the number of voters goes up, somewhere between 8 and 10 million. Actually, between 2016 and 2020, I believe it went up almost 20 million voters. So both of these guys are probably going to see their votes increase. I mean, Trump will certainly see his votes increase, although I don't think he has the chance of getting more of a percentage of the vote than he did in 2016. I see his ceiling at 48, maybe 46%. The question is, if there's a drop off in the percentage that Biden gets, yes, the Electoral College, we all know how close the Electoral College can be. States can be within 8,000, 10,000 votes, maybe less. But if Joe Biden does not have a popular vote mandate like he did in 2020, I think it's the popular vote mandate that allowed the country to go forward, that allowed the certification to go forward, because people realized that he had kicked Donald Trump's ass in the popular vote, even if technically that doesn't count for anything. If we have an election where that popular vote is much, much closer, maybe razor thin, I think violence could be on the menu across the country. And I remind people, we had about 160 million voters in 2020. There will be more this time. 1/3 of that is 53 million people. And that's how many people, 1/3 of the electorate, are diehard Donald Trump supporters, diehard MAGA supporters, believe that 2020 was rigged, believe that Joe Biden is an illegitimate president, and he is an existential threat to democracy. Now, I don't think 50 million people are going to try to overthrow the United States. But if 0.1% of them do, that's over 50,000 people. And a lot of them, if not every single one of them, are going to be armed to the teeth. And I think when we get into the shit, between Election Day and Certification Day, this country is going to see something it hasn't seen, frankly, since the Civil War. I'm not saying there's going to be a civil war. I'm saying there's going to be some clashes.
It's going to be like IRA style violence. It's going to be car bombs in streets. And we've seen that to some degree since 2020. These plots against governors, these plots against state capitals, and I can see that becoming
secretaries of states and
exactly
Supreme Court justices.
The death threats that come to public figures, elected officials. These are the people who are very angry and very well armed, and it's worrisome. And the NRA let it happen.
Well, we're seeing politicians, the head of the GOP right now, they're using rhetoric when being asked outright, will you accept the 2024 election results across the board? And they're like, no, we're going to see what happens. We're going to wait. And they're already casting doubt. And what they're saying is, if we win, we'll accept them. But if we don't, we're letting people know, unless they win, there's going to be violence.
Yeah. And I remind our listeners, think about what 3,000 motivated terrorists going from Gaza to Israel were able to do in a matter of hours. And then think of what 50,000 motivated terrorists in this country can do in a matter of days and weeks.
Now, see, this is where I will disagree with you. I don't think we could find 50,000.
Okay, let's say it's 5,000.
Even that, and it's not always, and like anyone will tell you, it's not only just a question of finding 5,000. Sure, you could find 5,000, but the biggest issues will be like organizing these people. And this is what happened on January 6th. It was during their organization that they all got caught, because the only way to keep a secret is not to tell anyone.
Well, Greg, I'm going to respectfully disagree with you.
That's okay.
Because I think that January 6th actually wasn't as unsuccessful a conspiracy as you seem to think it was. The FBI did pick up some chatter, but, people still got there. The Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers still did what they did. And if you want to call it a failure, I would also say to you, January 6th, 2020 was just spring training. These people are smart too, and they're probably going to refine their techniques going into the next one.
I mean, I'll say about January 6th, like in the day leading up to it, I started seeing posts like, hey, do you see what these nut jobs are saying about showing up at the Capitol? Ha ha, Capitol Police going to kick their ass, barriers up. Or we were all like, they are never going to get in. That is not going to happen.
Yep.
And, we completely underestimated. We also underestimated Trump's and the Pentagon's ability to undermine preparations within the District of Columbia. So,
and that is the thing we do not have to worry about for January 2025. The Biden administration is not going to either deliberately or by accident have those preparations fall short. If Joe Biden is reelected, then he will be reinaugurated. I'm not saying it will be completely without violence. Kevin does have a point, but it's not going to be enough. There's not going to be enough violence to actually stop it. If Donald Trump, however, is elected, then American democracy and American independence is on the way out. He will certainly run for a third term in 2028, no matter what the Constitution tells him. He will go all in on help from Vladimir Putin in terms of all sorts of political interference, not just election interference. And he will abandon NATO, either by officially leaving or by making Article 5 useless. It will be a much darker and a much more dangerous world if Donald Trump is reinaugurated in 2025. And it will be the voters who put him there that are the problem.
Here's another fear of mine. I have many of them. I stay up at night thinking about this stuff.
Like, you could just be afraid of spiders, Kevin. It's so much simpler.
That too. Bill Maher was saying in the lead up to January 20th, 2020, Bill Maher was saying, I don't think Donald Trump's going to leave the White House. And I disagreed with that because I thought if Biden wins, if Biden is certified, the Secret Service will move Trump out of the White House, whether he likes it or not. But my fear for 2024 is, again, assuming we have a contested outcome, assuming things get messy and maybe there are attempts to have alternate slates or states where Donald Trump's name is not on the ballot, and then Mike Johnson tries to invalidate those slates of electors because he feels that they are not representative of the true outcome of the election, whatever. My concern is we're going to have two outcomes. And who's to say that on January 20th, 2025, that Joe Biden isn't on the steps of the Capitol getting sworn in, and Donald Trump isn't just down the block with another federal judge getting sworn in on the Bible. And he says, I'm the rightful president. And then where do you go?
The first thing Mike Johnson has to do is make sure he has a majority on January 3rd, 2025.
Good point.
And it's even, and Republicans maintaining the House majority is even less likely than Donald Trump getting elected.
Because Republicans may not maintain a House majority through the end of January at the rate they're going. They've got Scalise off getting a stem cell transplant. He's in a stale room. What's his face just left to go work in academia. They've got a vote and a half majority at this point. One guy gets the flu, and all of a sudden Hakeem Jeffries is our next speaker. It'll be great. Yeah. And Lauren Boebert might be getting arrested. She punched her husband. Her ex-husband. She was in a restaurant this weekend, punched her ex-husband in the face. Police are hoping someone took cell phone video.
So I'm just going to take control of this, and I'm going to do the segue myself. Now that we have discussed the dangers to democracy as we see them, we do have a president running for re-election whose job includes protecting and preserving democracy. Kevin, what do you think the president should do, either as the incumbent in office or as a candidate running for re-election, to keep us on the rails, if you will?
I do have a concern, and it came up for me this week when Biden made that speech that was sort of like kicking off his 2024 campaign. And it was all about, again, the existential danger that Donald Trump poses to democracy. My concern is this. I think that danger is real. But I'm afraid that if Biden is ringing that bell for the next 10, 11 months, it will not resonate for voters come election day. And I'm wondering if maybe he wouldn't have been better off holding that really, in my opinion, the most powerful argument he has for the general election. I'm afraid that Donald Trump is a danger to democracy, is going to become an eye roller on the right by the time the campaign rolls around, the real general election campaign.
Rebekah.
All right. Well, Kevin, I think that the speech that Biden gave was a response to the anniversary of January 6th. And I think there was nothing else he could have said in a speech this weekend. So whether he continues to hammer that point home remains to be seen. I think, and we talked about this recently, that Biden needs to address the border in the first quarter of 2024 and then push that fight onto someone else. I think he should show up at the State of the Union with a comprehensive immigration reform package. It needs to be tied to economic stimulus by pointing out, as DJ often rightly does, that an increased workforce is good for America, even if those workers were born somewhere else. And he needs to just plunk this big old package down in front of Congress and say, we're all on the same page. We got to reform this. You guys are the ones who pass laws. I'm going to go campaign for president now. And anytime anybody brings it up, his stock answer for the rest of the campaign can be, I gave Congress a package. They just aren't. They're Congressing about it, which leaves him free to dodge criticism and address other issues, economic issues, kitchen table issues, the kind of middle class values that we all associate with Joe Biden.
Greg, the question is, if there's one thing that you would advise President Biden, either as the incumbent or as the candidate for re-election, to do to keep us on the rails as a country and as a democracy, what would that be?
The problem with Biden as an incumbent is he can't run on his record. He can't run on the economy. everyone who, even though the economy's doing much better, everyone doesn't think it is. And so every time he brings it up, everyone goes, well, I'm still not getting. So he can't run on anything that a usual incumbent runs on. And he can't run on the infrastructure bill because my local Republican guy has already taken credit for all the things that it's done. So he's splitting credit with all these other people who are taking this. So all those things are out the door too. Really, at this point, there's two things, and they're both kind of the same. One, he's got to be funny. He's got to be laughing. The biggest criticism America has on him, the people, is that he's old. He's got to make jokes about it. He's got to turn his weakness into his strength. Like, I hear everyone thinks I'm old. And he has started making those references like he was there at the Constitution. Awesome. And then the other thing is he's got to remind people what it was like under Trump, because we've all forgotten. We forgot how bad it was as under COVID. I told someone the other day, do you remember having to wear masks all the time? And they're like, oh yeah, that was pretty bad for some reason.
And DJ, what about you?
I've always thought that Biden should do this because it would put his opponents on the back foot. It would confuse them. It would get them so riled up that they would make mistakes, all that kind of thing. It would get in their heads. Frankly, he needs to question their patriotism. Anybody, particularly Donald Trump himself, and every elected Republican who defends Donald Trump to the end, question their patriotism. He can't question the patriotism of voters. I can. He can't. But he certainly can question the patriotism of Elise Stefanik. He certainly can question the patriotism of Josh Hawley, of Mike Lee, of Rand Paul, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Don't just say they're bad for democracy, although they are. Move it up to that last line. Grab the last line. Call them un-American. Call them anti-American. Take the flag away from them. I was a Republican for 25 years. We treated the American flag as our bumper sticker because we spent so much time in the 70s and in the 80s basically claiming that we were the real Americans and they weren't. That is still something that Republicans use today. Use it against them. Take that weapon away from them. Challenge the Trumpers' patriotism. That's what I would do.
Moving on to talk about the Trump court cases. We can't get away from speaking about Donald Trump. I assume that's the way it's going to be for the next 11 months. But
it is really worth talking about the fact that the leading candidate for one of the major political parties has multiple court cases and is currently out on bail for 91 different charges.
So let's go around the horn here, starting with the DC. Let's see. Trump's immunity claim case going to the D.C. Circuit on January 8th. Anybody want to throw out predictions on what happens there?
I will. That will get thrown out quicker than when I tried to make chili with avocados. But look, it's a double-edged sword. If the Supreme Court rules and says, like, well, yes, everything you do in office, you're free, then what's to stop Biden from taking over the country on his watch, and doing the exact same thing?
The DC Circuit case, from what I gather, and I am not a lawyer, and unlike Kevin, I never even wrote about them for TV. So what I understand is if the DC Circuit panel says, no, absolutely, Mr. Trump, you are not immune, he can call for a review called en banc, according to Andrew Weissman's podcast, where the entire panel of judges that sit on that circuit then review the case. So that eats up time. And then depending on what they say, he can send it to the Supreme Court for yet an additional level of review. And that eats up more time. And if Trump's real goal is to delay until he could potentially be inaugurated and cancel all this stuff, then that is to his benefit.
DJ?
Yeah, I'm not going to pay any attention what the D.C. Circuit decision is because no matter which way it goes, it's going to be appealed. What matters is what the Supremes will say whenever they get around to saying it.
Yeah, and again, I go back to, I know I'm a broken record on this, but if somehow Donald Trump avoids going to court in 3 or all 4 of these cases before the election, this guy's going to be a caged animal during the election and after the election. And God only knows what he will do, because his ace to stay out of jail is to stop those court cases from going forward. And if he thinks I have to get into the White House to be able to circumvent certainly the federal cases, God only knows what he's going to tell his sycophants to do.
In order for that to work, let's go ahead and let DJ hijack the conversation and go to the what do you have to do to actually overturn a democratic election? The key thing you have to do is to make sure that you control both houses of Congress whenever it happens, because that is the only way you can actually get challenges to electoral votes to be accepted. They can be heard all they want, but unless, and this is under the new Electoral Count Act, unless both houses of Congress reject the electors from a particular state, those electors will stand. So if Donald Trump really wants to overturn an election, he will need to ensure that on January 3rd, 2025, the Republicans have a majority in the House and they have a majority in the Senate. And that means if the voters don't give those majorities to them, that effectively means he has to kill some congressmen and senators. And this ties back into what Kevin was talking about. We could very well see a number of assassinations in that scenario, because you will probably have some folks who will say to themselves, okay, if the Democrats have 225 members of the House, the Republicans have 210. If we kill 16 Democratic congressmen, Mike Johnson is Speaker and he can put Donald Trump in the White House. They will do that. There was a part of me that thought some of the January 6th crew was thinking of doing that, of finding a dozen Democratic congressmen to whack so that Nancy Pelosi would not be in charge of the House anymore. That is the worst case scenario, and that isn't something we should simply ignore or dismiss as too far-fetched, unfortunately.
Now, just one thing I do want to bring up. One of the reasons the January 6th event was able to take place is there was this, this gravitational pull of the Trump rally on the ellipse, which is a completely legal thing that he was allowed to do. You're allowed to give speeches and march and do whatever shit he was doing over there. Absent that unifying event, the organizing becomes harder because it's factionalized, and the Proud Boys and the not Proud Boys and the marching Nazi bro fest and Charlie Kirk and Alex Jones, they don't actually hang out, I don't think. So, they're not like Antifa, which, is an organized, well-oiled machine that can make anything happen. So it wouldn't be one thing. It would be the five guys in a pickup truck trying to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer again, and that they are less effective and therefore slightly less worrisome, but it doesn't completely obviate the threat of assassinations or attempted assassinations in the wake of the election.
I'm going to be the source of reason to balance out DJ's point, because here I'm the one that's been talking about violence. But if we go to the Colorado case, which is, of course, the ballot appeal, the question of whether Donald Trump's name will be on all 50 state ballots, I see a pathway where even with a Democratic House and Senate, things could get a little dicey because, and we're going to talk about the merits of that case in a moment, but let's just jump to the possibility that Donald Trump loses in the Supreme Court and states are allowed to remove him from the ballot. And let's say that a fairly significant southern state, maybe North Carolina, maybe Florida, somehow removes him from the ballot. And then the Secretary of State in that state says, well, maybe there's write-ins for Donald Trump and he gets more write-in votes than Joe Biden. Or maybe they just say, we think that it was an unfair election because the Republicans didn't have a candidate on it. Therefore, I'm not certifying that slate of electors. I'm certifying a different slate of electors. If they send alternate slates of electors, even with a Democratic House, things could get messy. DJ, I throw it back to you because you really understand these things far better than I do. Does that make any sense to you?
I would be very hard pressed to find a situation where a Republican Secretary of State can look at a situation where Joe Biden's clearly won more votes than Donald Trump in their state and say, you know what? No, I don't believe it. I'm convinced there's fraud, and have it hold up in court. I am going to say in terms of risks, it's not one that's really on my radar or something we have to worry about yet.
About the Colorado cases, that is going before the Supreme Court on February 8th. And assuming that the court decides to issue their ruling immediately after hearing arguments or shortly after hearing arguments, as opposed to waiting until the end of the term, then that question will be decided. And it will be probably pretty definitive. If I were a betting person, though, I would say what the court is going to say is you need some sort of certification of insurrection activities to trigger a 14-3 disqualification. The Confederates that this amendment were written about were certifiably Confederates. There was ample evidence. They signed on the rolls of Confederate genius or whatever, however you signed up for that before the internet. So it was indisputable. So I think they're going to say that they need convictions in a court of law about insurrection activities in order to disqualify a candidate from the ballot. So that is going to leave it up to the federal courts or other challenges to create those certifications to disqualify Trump.
So I'm looking at the list. I happen to find a roster of state secretaries of state while you were talking, and it turns out there are only three blue states that have Republican secretaries of state. One is Pennsylvania, but the Republican appointed is Al Schmidt, the Philadelphia election official who said, no, Donald Trump did not win the election. It was fair. And he was actually appointed by a Democratic governor, Governor Shapiro, because he's an honest guy. The other one is New Hampshire, which has a whole of 4 electoral votes, and my home state of Virginia, which if Virginia is close, there could be a lot bigger problems for Joe Biden, because he did win the state by 10 points last time.
Well, I will say this, TJ, you just gave me an extra hour's sleep tonight because of what you said about Pennsylvania, because that's the one I'm really worried about. So let's talk about, unfortunately, the war in the Middle East drags on. The question this week is it going to expand? Is Hezbollah going to draw Israel into Lebanon? And again, I'll throw it out to you guys. What do you see happening there, and what does it portend for the presidential election?
First of all, if the war gets expanded into Lebanon, then it becomes more than just an Israel-Palestine conflict, because Hezbollah has seized a part of another country, Lebanon. They have a history of horrific human rights abuses, not just against Jews, but also against fellow Arabs in Lebanon and in Syria. So if this becomes a war between Israel on the one side and Hamas and Hezbollah, the anti-Semitic cause becomes a lot more complicated, because now you're also defending a terrorist group that has slaughtered Syrians and enjoyed doing so on behalf of their Persian allies in Tehran. Things just become a lot more complicated for the wacko anti-Semitic side in that kind of situation. So I actually think young voters, and you're right, young voters very much think Palestine has gotten the short end of the stick, and they're not necessarily wrong. But if suddenly a group that the Syrian diaspora is going to say, oh, wait, those are the guys who killed my cousin because he rose up against Bashar Assad, a lot of these free Palestine people start going, and then disappear. So I think that will actually help Biden domestically, because it will. Those who criticize him from the left will have far less to criticize if Israel is also fighting Hezbollah as well as Hamas. If that doesn't happen, though, then at some point, the war will come to an end sometime in 2024. Netanyahu's far-right allies have said, basically, we're going to ethnically cleanse Gaza, we're going to encourage voluntary migration, which is frankly Roman.
I was going to say, isn't that self-deportation under a new?
I would say I would call it Romanesque, and not in a good way.
Mm.
And the Biden administration has already been on record saying, no, that's a bad idea. Don't do it. So either this will become a war with Hezbollah, which will make it much harder for the left to criticize Biden, or it will become a situation where Biden is seen having more arguments with Israel over policy, in which case much of the friction that he has with young voters and voters to his left will dissipate because they will see Joe Biden actually criticizing Bibi Netanyahu and criticizing him pretty constantly. So no matter which way this goes, I think Biden will be in a better position politically in November than he is today.
And I just want to say, who would have thought that 3.5 months into this war, that in the new year, the most pressing controversy of the war is the question of whether Lloyd Austin, the Defense Secretary, had a penile implant or not.
Okay, I'm going to come to Lloyd Austin's defense and say, I bet he was having cataract surgery. That's what I think happened. I think he got.
You don't hide cataract surgery from the White House.
No,
I'm sorry.
You don't hide it from the White House, but like you also don't mention it to the White House because you're supposed to be home later that afternoon. And if he got like some kind of infection and wound up in the hospital and realized 3 days later, oh shit, I never told Joe. You know, that's my guess.
No. Somewhere on his.
You are the Secretary of Defense. The level of privacy you might want as a private citizen goes out the window when you are a cabinet minister.
There's this thing. I'll send you guys a link. It's called ball ironing.
It's ball tanning that Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, similar, but it gets rid of all the wrinkles.
That makes sense because if you've had the sun damage from the ball tanning,
right,
you need to, okay,
and it gets rid of it discoloration, and if you guys want, I'll let you. I'll give you my guy's number, but other people's guy's number, but it's a real thing.
Code for that.
Yeah,
balls for the price of one.
And I just want to be clear. I don't want anybody to think that I am anti-penile implants. That is not my point.
No.
I don't think the VA covers penile implants. That's a weird story. But yeah, I mean, like seriously, cataract surgery. You're usually home by lunch, and if something went wrong, and
not cataracts.
I've been working.
So you know what? We could meet. We could meet on a middle ground. And say it was like a vasectomy, which is like the cataracts for the penis.
Maybe he was having his kidneys checked like Melania.
Okay, so I'm the one that took this train off the rails a few times already tonight. So I'm going to try to get us back on track. And I take full responsibility for being immature tonight. But we wanted to end the show by talking about where people can find us and our various projects when they're not listening to the More Perfect Union. So, DJ, I'm going to start with you. What would you like to promote? Where can people find your work?
My music can be found at djmcguire1.bandcamp.com, and it is a finely balanced discography between me screaming at the void, that is the Trump era, and various funny sci-fi and fantasy tunes.
I love it. Rebekah, what about you? Where can people find your work?
Oh, I've made a promise to myself this year. I'm going to diversify my social media use. So you can find me on Twitter. And yes, I do still call it Twitter, just the same way I call that airport in Arlington, Virginia, National. My Twitter handle is Rebekah Writer, and that's Rebekah Writer. My Threads handle,
Writer, Writer.
Yes, like somebody who writes. My Threads handle is What Rebekah Writes. And if you're interested in what I don't write, but what I read, you can find me on Instagram at What Rebekah Reads. You see a trend here.
And she reads everything. Let me guarantee you. If it's in print, it's on her nightstand. And I'm going to mention, by the way, Rebekah, not only am I at kevinkelton.com, but my books can be found at Amazon.com, and I'm still waiting for you to read and give me an honest critique of one of mine. I would love nothing better than to see one of your reviews on Amazon under one of my books.
I do. I need to read the what is it? Super Vows, the covenant marriage one. That's on my list for this year.
Thank you. And Greg, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can't. I'm not doing anything currently. Me and Wayne LaPierre, neither of us are doing much. Thoughts and prayers go out to Wayne for losing his job. But no, seriously, I don't have anything really in the works right now. I'm just kind of cold chilling. people go to Habitat for Humanity, give them gobs of money, put it in my name, or don't, or spend time on DJ or Kevin or Rebekah's page. Yeah, I'm just a guy. Good looking guy, mind you, but just a guy.
I like that. I like the Habitat for Humanity shout out, Greg. That's a good one.
They're good people.
They're good people.
They do good shit.
It's a great organization. Absolutely. So we want to thank everybody for listening. If you enjoy what we do here, please follow us on Twitter at MPU Podcast and on Instagram at MPU Fan Club. And don't forget to share our link on your Facebook timeline so your friends can discover us as well. And as always, we want to thank Alan Keeney for our theme music. And I'm going to throw this out. I think the reason Wayne LaPerriere is stepping down from his role with the NRA is because he, too, had a penile implant that went bad.
I thought that's what they got guns for, to make up for the needing a penile implant.
It probably backfired on him or something. They put it in backwards. Sir, he didn't read the safety manual.
The recoil on his penile implant.
Hey, thoughts and prayers.
Thoughts and prayers.
Thoughts and prayers to Wayne and his new penile implant.
And you knew that once he realized there was a problem, he could not keep the job if everybody knew he didn't know how to lock and load.
Oh!
If we can get one of these references to go viral, our jobs here are done.